All right, a very good evening to you, and I'd like to welcome you to 30 at 7:30 tonight. Again, this is a pre-recorded 30 at 7:30, but I don't want you to click away from this because we're going to talk to you tonight from a very familiar story, but there's likely some parts of this story that you have never really looked at before. And it's from the story of David and Goliath. You think you know the story, but hang on, there's a lot more. I'm glad you joined us tonight. Make sure that you are commenting in the comment section here on YouTube. One of us will likely be in there with you for a little bit tonight, and I want to find out too if you have any additional questions after we have talked about this story. Now, you think you know the story, and you do know a lot of the story if you grew up around church or even are familiar in any way, shape, or form with some of the history of the Bible. You've heard the story of David and Goliath. As a matter of fact, that story is often referred to, or those characters, the character of David and the character of Goliath, are often used to talk about as metaphors for like a big corporation, a Goliath corporation versus a small business, a David. When we talk about something that is enormous and large and big and overwhelming, we call it a Goliath. And then when we talk about something being small and regular and just existing, but nothing too significant, we call it a David. So the story of David and Goliath has so many implications. But let me give you the setting real quick, because you can actually find the story in 1 Samuel chapter 15, 16. Now, here's what's happened. Samuel the priest has already anointed David to be the next king of Israel, but I don't think that David truly has understood what this is all about. David has some of his brothers that are out fighting for Israel, and they have gone to war. And so David's father, Jesse, takes David and says, I want you to take some supplies to your brothers who are on the front line. And so that's exactly what David did. So David gets there, and in 1 Samuel, in 1 Samuel, actually chapter 17, and I'm going to read a couple of parts of it here in just a little bit, but in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 12, David is sent out to be with his brothers. Now, what has happened is for 40 days, every morning and evening, a Philistine champion by the name of Goliath has come out 40 days, 40 nights, and challenged the people of Israel to a battle, to a fight. Nobody wanted to fight him, not even King Saul. Everybody was afraid of this guy because he was allegedly some 9 feet tall. He truly was a giant and intimidated everybody that came into contact with him. Everybody. Everybody except a little boy named David. But you think that David was brave. You know, like he's brave beyond his years. Well, now hang on, because David had a motivating factor that we often don't think about and we don't look at. So here's the story. David gets there, and as he is delivering these supplies, he takes the basket up, he goes and finds his brothers, and so while he's there and he gets there to the front line, he suddenly hears, and I'm looking at this in 1 Samuel 17, verse 23, it says, as David was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. That David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. So David, the little shepherd boy, now I don't know how little he was or exactly how old he was at this point, but David, he hears the taunting going on. Like, how long has this been going on? So he hears him. And so as soon as the Israel army saw Goliath, verse 24, they began to run away in fright. They're literally running. David's watching them like, where's everybody going? They're running away. And they said, have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered, here it is. Listen. The king has offered a huge reward. This is verse 25 of 1 Samuel chapter 17. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. Let's catch the reward. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife. So he's going to get one of his daughters for a wife. And the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. Now, I just hang on to that for a second. So whoever goes out and fights Goliath, The king has said, you can have one of my daughters in marriage, and you and your entire family will never have to pay taxes. Now, let me ask you a question. What would you do if you could now be heir to a king, if you had a few skills that you thought, and you were told you will never have to pay taxes again? What would you do? So watch David. He hears this. David asks the soldiers standing nearby, because David wants to make sure he's heard this correctly. He says to the soldiers, because he heard the men talking, he says to the soldiers, what will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine, anyway, that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God? David's now getting some confidence. He's like, really? King's daughter, no taxes. Who does this Philistine think that he is? And they confirmed it, verse 27, and said, yes, that is a reward for killing him. Now, David's mind is starting to go like, maybe I could fight him. Maybe I could win. Maybe I could get this. And so David's oldest brother then says, what are you doing? You're a shepherd. This is not going to happen. There's no way you're going to be able to do this. And so he keeps asking this question over and over and over again, so much so that it's finally reported to Saul, the king. So Saul sends for David. So David then tells Saul, you don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go fight him, verse 32. And Saul looks at him and says, have you seen him? He's 9 feet tall. In fact, he says to him, he says, you're only a boy, and this guy has been a man of war since he was as young as you. Like, he's been trained. He's huge. Goliath is insurmountable. And David looks at Saul and says, wait a minute, king. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats all of these years. When a lion or bear comes to steal the lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I then this to lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. He's defied the armies of the living God. Meanwhile, in David's back of his head, back of his mind, king's daughter, no taxes. He said, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of this lion and bear will rescue me from the Philistine. Saul said, go ahead. Now here's where it gets interesting. Saul gets his own armor. Now Saul's a big guy, and so he gives him the broad helmet and the coat of mail, the coat that's going to be like the armor to protect him in case a javelin or something comes at him. And so David puts it on, and he's never worn anything like this, and he finally says this. Here it is. I can't go in these. This is verse 39. He protested to Saul, I'm not used to them. So David takes them off. This sounds like some kind of a kamikaze mission at this point. David, what are you doing? You have no armor. David goes back to what he knows. What he has been using, what he's familiar with, where his strengths are, what he's been doing for years. He goes and he grabs 5 smooth stones from the stream, verse 40, and puts them into the shepherd's bag. And now with his staff and his sling, he starts across the valley to fight the Philistine. Of course, Goliath thinks this is funny. He says, am I a dog? And he's taunting David. And David said, you come to me with a sword and spear and a javelin, verse 45. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you, and I will cut off your head. I love this. David is looking up at this 9-foot guy, and he goes, oh yeah, well guess what? Here's what's going to happen. We're going to have a battle. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to win, and I'm going to cut off your head. And then I'm going to give your dead bodies to your men and the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. Not that I'm a hero, but that there's a God in Israel. And everyone will know the Lord rescues us. It says, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. See, everybody else had been running away when Goliath came out. Not David. David runs out to meet him. Suddenly he takes out a stone and hurls it with a sling, and he hits Goliath in the forehead. The stone sank in, he fell to the ground, and it says David triumphed. David became victorious over the Philistine, verse 50, with only a sling and a stone because he had no sword. And then what does he do? Exactly what he said he was going to do. He goes over, takes Goliath's sword, cuts off his head, and then Israel destroyed the Philistine army in battle. Wow. Now, I want you to think about a couple of things in this story, because we often just see that David looks like he's standing up, but David had another motivation. There was a prize at the end of this thing. Not only was he defending Israel, but David had financial gain, had personal gain. He had a purpose and a motivation. It wasn't just to save Israel, but he was doing this for his family. He was going to have a wife. He was going to keep the bloodline of the king going, because he would get one of the king's daughters, and he was going to have financial reward by never having to pay taxes again for him and his family. So he was actually preserving the financial well-being of his family. He went out and fought first for his family and then for the people of Israel. And that was a motivating factor. But I want you to realize that he slayed Goliath with what he knew. That's really important. See, we often, when we face a big obstacle in our lives, we often think we've got to learn something new. We don't look at what we have in our hands. We don't look at what we've been given. We don't look at our experiences. We don't look at our own talents. We don't look at our own strengths and our own gifts that God has given us. And that's a mistake. I think about Moses. Remember when the story with Moses, when God told Moses, I want you to, and he had to like negotiate with Moses. It was crazy. Moses sees a burning bush, and he kept giving excuses to why he couldn't be the one that was deliver Israel. And he kept saying, he said to God, what? He goes, all right, well, you're Jehovah. You want me to go in and get the people of Israel? What's going to happen when I go see Pharaoh and Pharaoh says, hey, how do I know that you're really of God? How am I gonna do this? So David kept questioning God on this. And God looks at David and he said, or not David, excuse me, Moses. He looks at Moses and he says, what is that in your hand? Moses, when this happened with Moses, he had the shepherd's staff in his hand. And God turned it into a serpent. He said, throw it down. Turns into a serpent. Pick it back up. But it was what he had in his hand. God takes David and basically uses what's in his hand, what's in his shepherd's bag of experiences, if you will. In the shepherd's bag of experiences, see, we try to put other things on. When we get ready to go into battle and we've got something big that we want to accomplish, when we got a big obstacle that we've got to overcome, we often will try to put something on, to do something differently, to figure something new out, and it just doesn't fit, and it doesn't work, and it's uncomfortable. But what do? We try to go into battle with it. We don't take it off and go back to what we know, to go back to where our strengths are at. And that's what David did. Who do you think you are? David said, I've been here before. I've conquered things that were bigger. I've been a shepherd. I'm not worried about him. I'll use what I've got. And that's why he took the armor off and he went and he got the 5 smooth stones. And he put them in his shepherd's bag. No javelin, no spear, no armor. He went into battle with his experience that he had, the strength that he possessed, the talents that God had given him, and he slayed the giant. Oh yes, and by the way, the purpose that was in the back of his mind. A wife, a bloodline, and financial stability and security. That's what we have to do. When there's something big in front of us, we have to look and say, what's the purpose? What's beyond just this obstacle? We've been talking about obstacles a lot because of this pandemic, and we've really said we can look at the obstacles as an opportunity. And that's what David, there was an obstacle, but Goliath was an opportunity. Goliath represented an opportunity for David to establish his family, for David to give financial security to his family, for David to establish his reputation, and ultimately for David to be the guy that was going to be the king of Israel. So all he saw with Goliath was an obstacle that was, and more than an obstacle, was an opportunity for him to show up. We have that every single day. You can look at your obstacles as obstacles and say, I'm scared, and turn around and run because it just looks too big. It just looks like I can't overcome this. There's no way I can do it. It's just too big. It's too great. That's it. And we turn around and we run in fear. But not David. David, as Goliath continued to taunt him, ran towards Goliath. And that's what we have to do. We have to have a purpose, which he had. We have to have a plan, which he had. The plan was, I got 5 stones. Now, I don't know what he was going to do if he ran out of 5 stones, but he hit him with the first one, and bam, he was done. But it took 5 of them. So he had a purpose to go out there. He had a plan. And he saw what was going to happen if he instituted all of this. The profit that he was going to get from this was his reputation, was wealth, or preservation of wealth, and was a family. He kept all of that in mind as he ran toward the obstacle and not away from it. See, that's how we turn obstacles into opportunities. It's real simple. And it's the secret. And you can tell everybody you heard it first here on YouTube at Community Bible Church. The way that we turn obstacles into opportunities is that we run towards them and not away from them. You go, it's not too smart. No, it's very smart. We run towards it and confront it face on with what we have. We look at what we've got in our hand. We look at what we've done in our lives. We look at we look at beyond it. What is beyond it? What we can gain as a result of it? What we can gain in experience? What we can gain in learning? What we can gain in reputation? What we can gain in self-esteem? What we can gain in faith? What we can gain. But so often what we do is we freeze or we flee because the obstacle looks too big. What obstacle do you have in your life right now? What is the obstacle that you're facing, that you're looking at it and it causes you consternation? It may wake you up in the middle of the night. It may keep you up. You may wonder, I don't even know how I'm going to get through this. What is it? What's the obstacle? Now, what do you got to do to run toward it and meet it head on? Well, you got to look at where God's brought you thus far. Look at that He's never let you down. Look at the experiences you've gained from other difficult times in your life and how you grew from them and what you learned from them. Look at what your strengths and your experiences are. Look at the people that God has given you to encourage you. And then set a plan and say, here's exactly what I'm going to do. And then keep progressing towards that obstacle. What's going to happen is with each step that you take, you're going to gain more confidence. With each step that you take in faith, God is going to meet you there. With each step that you take, you are going to have the opportunity and the privilege of watching that obstacle look smaller and smaller. And then you're going to take it down and move on. We all have obstacles, but we can turn them into opportunities. Call them a giant if you want. You may feel like David sometimes, but I got news for you. God has already given you gifts, talents, abilities, and experiences to meet whatever challenges you're going to face. So I want to encourage you, face those challenges and turn those obstacles into opportunities. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We've been more like 20 at 7:30 than 30 at 7:30. But I do want to encourage you again and just remind you that we will be back in services this coming Sunday at Community Bible Church, 9:45 and 11. As you know, we are practicing physical distancing. When we are in the services, you will be required to wear a face covering. Our services are a little bit streamlined so that we're not in here as long as we normally are in our services. But if you'd like to be here at 9:45 and 11, we are starting to hit capacity at 11 o'clock. So if you want an opportunity to come at 9:45, we still have seats that are open there. We will find a seat for you, but if we have to turn people away, we will. We're not going to do the RSVP thing if we can avoid it. Also, I want to thank you again, as we have been over and over, for your faithfulness. If you'd like to support us through this difficult time, and you're not here, but you're watching us online, 1-877-781-1599 is our text to give program. We're looking at a couple of other things that we can do. So I appreciate you all so much. Be watching for next couple of weeks. We're going to probably start something on Zoom, because I think that it's going to be a good opportunity for us to do some different things and some new things. And so hang in there, stay with us, and we'll see you soon. God bless you. Have a great Wednesday evening.